Welcome to the Daily Egg. Today we're going to talk about our experience selecting a sperm donor and what we considered and lessons we learned and the whole process, because I know a lot of people are really curious about that. So why don't we go into what we considered?
So the very first thing that we considered was if we want to have a known donor, like someone that might already be connected to us through our life, or if we want to have an unknown donor. And so that would be for us through a sperm bank. Another thing we considered when we kind of thought about known versus unknown is like some of the legal stuff, like having access to a lawyer and having agreements made and all those sort of things, which I think when you know a sperm donor can get a little bit more complicated and you have to pay for all of that separately versus an unknown donor. If we go through a sperm bank, a lot of that is kind of like included in the process.
Yeah. And we also thought about what the experience would be for like our child in terms of their access to donor information or their relationship to the donor. I think the challenge of using someone in our life is in like, what is the relationship with the child going to be like? And how do we talk about that? I think, for us, it's a donor, right? Like not a father. Like we won't ever, like our child can choose if they want to call the donor their biological father or dad, but we'll always use that language of they're the donor. And so if it was someone we knew, like how do you navigate that? And then, if it's someone we don't know, how do we make sure that like if our child does want to know information about them, that we have that information and that they can get to know them. And then a lot of times when you use like a known donor too, like like Danny said, there's so many legal implications. Like we would need the person to give up their parental rights. We would need to have a bunch of different testing done. We're going through a clinic, so all the sperm that we use has to be like FDA certified. So there'd be like a whole process, which could be like, it's a lot to ask a person to be a sperm donor, I think. So the second thing we considered was ethnic similarities. I think, ultimately, originally we wanted one donor. Mm-hmm. And you really wanted one donor. Mm-hmm. You want to say why?
Yeah, so kind of this is a little bit of what we talked about in our last video, but essentially our ideal process is that Ashley gets pregnant first, and then a couple of years later, I get pregnant second. And so when we thought about a donor, we would need a donor for a donor who's compatible with each of our eggs. And we were talking about having the same donor for each of us. So we have like one sperm donor, we order a lot of vials of sperm, and then we use that for Ashley, and then like a couple years later, we use that for me. But one of like the huge issues that came up really quickly was that there's really like a lack of Black donors. I think in one sperm bank that we looked at, they had like 500 total sperm donors. Yeah. I said they had about 10,000, but I guess I was
Danny
wrong.
told you they had 10,000 sperm donors. It was not true.
I don't know where I got that. They had 500 sperm donors, and only 5 of them were Black.
Yeah.
So going back to the same sperm donor, so why that was important to me was so that the kids could have like a genetic similarity with them. So they would have the same sperm donor. So for example, part of that is like how they would look, like there could be something similar about how they would look. And then also part of it is like if they wanted to go through the process of finding their sperm donor, like that could be a shared experience for them.
Yeah, definitely. Like obviously we're their parents, they'd have that connection, but they would also have that donor connection that they could like feel, and it would be like a permanent part of their connection.
Yeah.
So that was something that we considered. And then our actual process. So this is when we started looking at cryobanks. We were really overwhelmed. I would say we first started with like listening to podcasts. We listened to, what was the one? We listened to 2 that were really great.
The Gayest show on birth.
The Gayest show on birth, which was really helpful. Even though they were doing IVF, which was different than our process, it was still like really cool.
Reciprocal IVF.
Reciprocal IVF, which is a different than what we're doing. it was still really interesting to hear about their perspective. And then another one that we're totally blanking on, the Gay Family Podcast or something. That
Queer
also,
Family Podcast or
Queer
something?
Family Podcast?
I don't know. We'll put the link in here.
I don't know if we will.
We'll drop the link in the comments below.
But they had a bunch of episodes on like using sperm banks, like using different, like, you know, just that whole process. That was like really helpful for us getting a rundown on what we could choose. Will we talk about Seed Scout here?
Yeah.
Okay. So like when we were hearing about it, we heard about, so there's like, you know, there could be ethical dilemmas with using a sperm bank. I think it's worth us going into them here, but there's a company called Seed Scout, which they, instead of like, you know, a sperm bank, you just have a bunch of profiles, which hopefully we'll show you guys later. And then you pick Seed Scout, like they meet with your family, and then you, they help you find a donor, and then you do stay in contact with the donor. Like the minimum is like a yearly check-in or update. And the value of that is that if they have any like new medical issues that you might want to know that could affect your child, they'll update you on that. And then like you just have like a pretty consistent like cadence of communicating and sharing updates so that everyone's like really involved in the process. They have much smaller family limits as well. I think like 3, or you can choose someone that's just exclusively donating to your family. So it's like very expensive. It was cost prohibitive to us. I think just like for, it's like $10,000 to start, like to use that process, which was like half of the budget we'd allocated to that. So it wasn't going to be like feasible for us. But the other issue for us was like staying in contact with the donor, which like neither of us was comfortable with.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't love it, but to be honest, when I found out their statistics of like, they have, I don't remember the exact number, but they actually have a lot of queer sperm donors. And so when I found that out, it kind of like changed my idea about that.
Yeah.
A little bit.
Yeah, it's like the worst case scenario is you get some straight guy who's like, I want to be involved in a weird way. You know what I mean?
That just like pushes boundaries.
Yeah, exactly. And that's just not something we feel comfortable with. And then it's like, how are they explaining it to their families, right?
Yeah.
Are people going to think like this is their child, which genetically, biologically it is their child, but they're not a parent, right? Mm-hmm. Like they're not a part of the parenting process, or we don't want them to be a part of the parenting process at this point. So how will other people understand that relationship and feel a sense of ownership of our kids, you know? Mm-hmm. That's the hard about being queer parents, is like, we are the parents, and it's so easy for our rights as parents to be taken away, and they're our kids. Mm-hmm. So it's like hard to involve a third person in that process, and then whoever else is in their life. And I think that would even be the hard thing of choosing a known donor, is like everyone, including that person in our parenting process. And I don't know, it just feels hard because it's like we're the parents, and we want to be respected as the parents, as a 2-mom parent family.
Whereas, like, I mean, this is just definitely an assumption, but I have just like a higher comfort level with like if it was a queer sperm donor that we would be in contact with, because like I'm kind of operating from the assumption that they have like similar views of like what it means to build a family and all of the things that go into building a family when you're queer and when you're a queer couple. Totally. That's an assumption, but like that's what just, I don't know, made me feel differently. But anyway, it's way too expensive for us. So
it wasn't even an option.
We won't be going down that road. I still sometimes think about it. But.
Yeah, it's like cool idea, but ultimately it's not in our budget.
Right. And then I think like the other thing that we've thought about and actually looked, especially because of like the lack of Black donors specifically, we started looking at some Facebook groups of like how can you meet a sperm donor. But we didn't really we didn't really like that for us.
Right. Disclaimer, if that's what you're using, no judgment. If that's what you're using, no judgment. It didn't work for us.
And you would still have to go through every step of the process, including all of the legal stuff on your own, which feels really daunting to us.
Yeah, like I like the idea of a bank because they take care of the genetic testing, which you need. We'll talk about that later. They take care of the legal stuff. So this person's already giving up parental right? So you don't need to, we will still need to get a lawyer to go through the adoption process, but we don't have to worry about getting a lawyer to negotiate that piece of it. And it's just like, you know that the sperm has been tested, like it just feels a little bit more contained and secure. I think the other thing that's in the back of our mind is like how will our child feel about this experience? And that's something we don't know, like how they will feel about it. But we plan on being really forthright that they were like conceived through a sperm donation. They have a donor out there.
Mm-hmm.
They will have the ability to find them when they turn 18. We'll have some information about the donor that we can share with our child as well, so they don't feel kind of like lost in that part of our identity. Like it will always be something they know, and that donor will like in a way like a fairy donor mother be in our life, just not like physically there.
Yeah. Which there's lots of good kids books about things like that now, which is very cool.
Yeah, a lot of really good resources.
Mm-hmm. So kind of back to our process. So like when we decided to use a cryobank or a sperm bank, we sat down one night and just like signed up for a bunch of them and just started flipping through all the sperm donors, and it got like really overwhelming really fast.
So overwhelming.
Because there's just a lot of information, and it's kind of, I don't know, it's overwhelming to think about, okay, we're seeing like a baby picture, a bio about them, maybe like interviewers' notes about them.
Yeah.
And then the medical history and their family's medical history.
Right.
So you're just kind of like clicking next, and you're being flooded with so much information, and we're like, oh my gosh, this is such a big decision.
Exactly.
How do we organize ourselves for this, and how do we kind of understand it all?
Yeah, because you could search by hair color, you could search by height, you could search by education level.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like endless, right? And like we obviously got in a relationship with each other. We weren't like, one day we will also need to find a male to procreate with. So it's kind of like a lot. And then you both have a lot of information and not enough. It's like you have information about their hobbies, but it's like, if I met this person, would I like them?
Yeah,
like,
and is that important to us?
Yeah, it's like, do I care? Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's just like really overwhelming.
Yeah. I think one thing I have seen that I kind of wish we did was like, I think that you can go online and find this now, like little surveys or like little worksheets to fill out with each other about like what's important to you.
Yeah.
And like maybe like be able to prioritize that a little bit more. So I think maybe having that conversation beforehand and being a little bit prepared would have been helpful.
Yeah,
to feel less
we just were like, let's look, let's see what's out there, not realizing that there were 500 things out there, and like nothing, we didn't know what we were looking for, and then we couldn't find things that we were excited about. So
yeah, and we were like finding out with each other in real time what was important to us and like what wasn't important to each other.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that, don't recommend.
So we did make a spreadsheet, which was helpful. So like it was very simple. We just put like, we did different tabs for different sperm banks, and then did the donor number, pros, cons, and other notes.
Yeah.
And so for, like pros, for example, we would put like things about their like race or ancestry, or maybe age, for example. And then cons would be, I don't know, what are some of our cons?
I honestly don't want to say them out loud.
It sounds discriminatory.
Yeah. I think what we were thinking about was like, if they have like an ethnicity that we don't have, how would we create that connection for our child? Could it be a con that they have something we don't have, and like we aren't able to like introduce them to that or give them a connection to that growing up? So like obviously like there's no ethnicity that's a con, but for our situation, like we would want them to be as close to us as possible, so we can say like, oh, I'm also Caribbean, and you have Caribbean ancestry, and that's something that I can like share with you or get you connected to. And then I think just like little things on profiles, maybe we were like, that seems like it could be an issue, whether it's a certain hobby or like how someone did or didn't progress in their like educational history. Like in some ways, like if I was out there looking for like a partner, like are those qualities that I would want to pass on, I think, in some kind of weird way.
Yeah. There's just a lot to think about.
What are you thinking?
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing that, like, I felt torn about. I don't know if educational achievement was really that important to me.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, it would be important to me out in the world, but more like because I would want to like be able to relate to that person in a way, not necessarily because I think that there's something inherently wrong. Not that I'm saying
Yeah.
you did this, but
Right.
there's not something inherently wrong with not completing high school. But
Yeah.
like those issues show up, or not issues, but like those differences show up more in the real world than on a piece of paper for your
True.
like biological secretions. I don't know. And anyways, there's so much like connected to that,
Yeah.
I guess. But I think for me, like identity development for our child was like an important factor.
Yeah.
Like how can they relate to us? How are they going to be able to like connect to like parts of themselves?
Yeah.
And how we as parents can guide them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That was a big one.
Mm-hmm.
And then genetic testing, which if you follow us on TikTok, we'll have some 5 tips. And one would be to get your genetic testing done early.
Yeah.
Before you start searching, because we're going through a fertility clinic, like, well, I don't know, there's so much to explain. I had never even thought of like genetic conditions ever, but if I'm a carrier for something like Fragile X syndrome, I don't know if people know what that is. I'm trying to think of something, sickle cell. I don't know, something like that. If I'm a carrier for it, and the donor is a carrier for it, then our child has an increased chance of getting that condition. So Sperm Bank, if you're going through a fertility clinic, they won't allow you to use the donor if they are a carrier for something and you're also a carrier for it. I have read in some different forums that they can sign a waiver, but that isn't the experience we've had so far. We found can I say this part? We found a donor that we were excited about, and then they were a carrier for 4 different conditions. I got my genetic testing. I wasn't tested for those conditions. And so our fertility clinic was like, you can't use this donor because we don't know if you're a carrier. So now our next step is to meet with a genetic counselor and get that additional testing to see if like we can create a child together. But it definitely creates like a disappointment because you're like, oh, like you're just not, like, at the end of the day, like the clinic is not going to let you use them.
So I guess we should back up and say that at first we did want the same donor for both of us.
Yes.
But then because of like the numbers of donors that there were, and because of like all of the factors that we just talked about that we considered, there really weren't that many good options that we felt like would be a good donor for both Ashley's eggs and my eggs.
Yeah.
And so we decided, simply based on a search of like Portuguese donors. Well, I did my own ancestry first. And so I got my ancestry results and am 50% Portuguese, which is what I had assumed.
Surprise, surprise.
Surprise, surprise. But I think also just like seeing it in percentages too was really interesting to me. And then we had searched, instead of like focusing on Black donors one day, we decided to just search by Portuguese donors. And we found one that like it doesn't say percentages, but he really looked similar to me and my dad.
Yeah.
And all of his like ancestries were the same as mine.
Yeah.
And so at that point we decided, let's be open-minded about sperm donors, and maybe we would use a different sperm donor for Ashley and a different one for me.
And we were excited about him, which but yeah, like we were excited about him, and that was the first donor we were excited about. That we were like, oh wow, I was like, that looks like you and John. And in his essays, he talked so much about his Portuguese identity, which like is also like something you do. I mean, it's something I don't know. It's something where we could share that. Like it just feels like something cool. And then it's like each of our kids would have that percentage of Portuguese heritage. So they would have that as like a connective tissue, which sounds really cool.
Right. Which is what we wanted.
Yeah. And it's like the best case scenario, knowing that we can't like procreate together and create a baby, to find a donor that's like similar enough to the other person so that it's like sort of like that,
And honestly, it does cut down on some of the costs too, because we are only buying now the sperm that Ashley needs, and so then we don't really have to pay to store it like every year that
Yeah.
we store it. Like we don't have to buy a surplus and then store it.
Yeah.
And then it kind of I don't know how to explain this. Like when it would be my turn, it's like you only have a limited number of vials, which is the vials that you bought and are storing. So if I ran out, then what I'm saying is there still would be a chance that we couldn't use the same sperm for whatever reason.
Like think of it like a person, like a person goes to a sperm bank, they donate sperm. They're not like going back every year. Like like there's a limited number of sperm that they have, and there's so many people looking for sperm. So there is so to avoid the situation where we buy the sperm, then when Danny's ready, the sperm is sold out. We would need to buy a ton of vials.
Yeah.
We would, and then we'd have to store it because you have to pay for monthly storage. So it just would like add a huge cost to it.
Yeah.
And then we found out from our doctor that she wants us to switch donors if we try 4 times and it doesn't work. So imagine we buy this and then we can't even use it.
Yeah.
So it just makes it makes it easier for us.
Yep.
Navigating the site. I guess we'll try to show this later. But like we talked a little bit about what information you can look for. You can look for genetic results. You can look for literally anything. The cost.
Yeah, there's different levels of cost. Every sperm bank is a little bit different. Some sperm banks, well, maybe all of them have this now. I don't know, but some of them that we saw have like an exclusive sperm.
Yeah.
Which is that they only allow like a certain number of families to access their sperm.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that was like the one ethical thing we didn't talk about was like there was a point before like 23andMe and Ancestry where you could go on and you could see who in the world has your genetic DNA, where like sperm donators could just be giving out their sperm to tons of agencies. Even though one agency will have a limit, they could just go somewhere else. So someone theoretically could have significant amount of siblings in the world. So I think that can be seen as like an ethical dilemma of just like, so some people will like to say this sperm donor will only give to my family, or the amount of families that they give to is super limited, to avoid that situation where someone has a ton of children out there and someone does Ancestry and finds out they have 50 half siblings across the country, which could be really alarming.
Yeah. All right. So
we didn't say the specific cost.
I mean, we don't really know the specific cost.
Yeah. We know the cost of like 1 vial of sperm.
$2,000.
$2,100
per vial.
So if you donated to our baby fund, thank you so much, because insurance does not cover sperm, shipping the sperm. The sperm bank is on the West Coast, and we need to be able to ship it quickly because it's frozen, and we'll need to ship it as soon as we need it, and then we'll have to pay for storage. Definitely at the sperm bank, possibly even at the fertility clinic, for 1 vial, which we would use once, and you need to use one every cycle, so that could be up to 12 cycles in a year.
Yeah, so we're starting with 4, so that's what, $6,000 to start. No, $8,000.
$8,000.
More than $8,000.
Yeah, $8,000.
Yeah. See, Seed Scout was.
I know. I guess that's $2,000 less than Seed Scout. So.
Anyway.
But if you would still like to donate, we're not going to say no. Maybe every year we'll just start an annual fund, because
we no longer accept gifts of any kind.
Just please give us $1,000.
Even $5.
Yeah.
Anyway, what are some of our lessons that we learned? I feel like we've been saying them. Like, one, do your research beforehand.
We have some down there too.
Yeah. See our TikTok for more. I think that, getting on the same page with each other about what's important to us, so we're not finding out in real time and bickering back. As you all know, that we like to tussle.
Like to tussle.
Just kind of having that conversation beforehand. I think also for me, it's a lesson of being open-minded and like mentally flexible and not getting so attached on like, this is my idea and this is how I want it done and this is what's gonna like make a baby. I have to remind myself to like soften into the process a little bit and be like, okay, there's a lot of options in this, and like let me feel free to like explore them as we go.
Yeah. And I think too, deciding what you will share and what you won't
Mm-hmm.
share. I think like there's so much we didn't know. I like talking to people about it. I like answering questions, and if
Mm-hmm.
I ever receive a question I don't want to answer, then I won't answer it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we both might have different ideas of what we want to share and what we don't want to share. And I think one thing I feel really strongly about is like I don't want anyone in our life to know more than our kid knows, right? So like specific information about our donor we wouldn't share because we want our child to have the ability to learn that then before some random person says, "Oh, I heard your dad loves to skateboard." And it's like, first of all, don't use the word dad, and then what are you talking about? So I think just like getting everybody on the same page of how to talk about what a sperm donor. I think not everyone has a same-sex couple or a couple that is using sperm donation, and like how do you talk about this like third entity that created your child, and how do you do that in a way that's respectful of like our wishes, but also like our child who is going to have a different experience than most people around them when it comes to understanding their like connection and their identity. Definitely get your genetic testing done before you look for donors so that you can like not be as disappointed or not have to deal with that. But yeah, I think just deciding what you want to do.
Yeah. And I think through this process, we're like still, we continue to practice communication skills.
Yeah.
and noticing when like one or the other of us is kind of dysregulated or overwhelmed. And so kind of like learning how to press pause on certain things and regulate ourselves and then come back together.
Yeah. And I think the other thing we've thought about is like, you know, for Danny being the non-birthing parent right now, what can her role be? And a lot of it is like supporting the sperm donation process. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like that could be a whole nother video.
Yeah, like how do both people feel involved?
Yeah.
When it's not like we just banged it out and then created a baby.
Literally.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think those are different things. So, anything else?
No. I think that concludes this segment.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.
Oh, should we do our little tagline out? Okay, ready? Until the baby comes.